Hey guys, welcome back. We have Rick Broering on here from the Musketeer Report, Xavier's 24/7 page. Chris was not, or Rick was nice enough to give us a couple minutes to talk about the recent addition of Travis Steele as the head coach and all the stuff that's been going on in the Xavier program last week or this past week. So thanks for giving us a couple minutes today, Rick.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, no worries. It's our pleasure. So we wanted to bring you on to discuss the hiring of Travis Steele for Xavier and the job he's done so far. Let's start with this, though. Obviously, over the course of a week, Steele was able to snag three transfers: Kyle Castlin, a guard from Columbia; Zach Hankins, who was D2 Player of the Year at Ferris State; and Ryan Welledge, who averaged 18.1 points per game this year at San Jose State, and is a really good shooter. Have you ever seen anything like this? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous to see a guy do this well the first week on the job. I mean, the only thing I can remember was last year when Archie Miller scooped up like three recruits in a 24-hour period, but he had a couple months under his belt at Indiana. So I want to get your thoughts on of Steele getting all these guys so fast, and how has this past week changed Xavier fans' perception of Steele?
Well, let's start with the last part of that question first, which is how their perception has changed. I don't think it's changed a whole lot because almost instantly when Chris Mack took the Louisville job, you heard Xavier fans clamoring that Travis Steele should be the next head coach. It was almost overwhelming fan support for him to be the next head coach. So everyone was thrilled when he got the job for the most part. There may have been a small portion of the fan base that wanted somebody with more experience or maybe had higher hopes for what Xavier could do with that position. But for the most part, I think fans were excited to get Travis Steele in there. And this past week has done nothing but, made them raise that excitement level. Now, in terms of have I ever seen anything like what he's done? I guess it remains to be seen what he's done, right? Like none of these three guys necessarily stand out as stars at the Big East level. In fact, you could make a case that none of them will work at the Big East level if you wanted to be really pessimistic and go worst case scenarios. So we will see how good this turns out to be when we get midway through the season or when we get into Big East play or whenever you want to make that judgment on this graduate transfer class that he's pulled in. However, if you're going to grade the job that he's done thus far, you have to give him an A. I mean, he came in, he was able to add bodies that seem like they should be able to contribute, and also in critical pieces. I mean, they definitely needed some front court depth. They added a guy in Hankins who, in my opinion, is probably the most likely to have a major impact on the team next year. And then they added a lights out shooter in Ryan Welledge, which is exactly what they needed to go with next year's team, which is filled with athletic drivers, but not much skill. And then Kyle Castlin is a guy that he gives you depth and experience at the guard positions. And while you have talented guards in Paul Scruggs and Quentin Gooden and Najee Marshall, you didn't have much depth. Elias Harden was a freshman last year that didn't really play at all. It's totally unproven. And then you had Keontae Kennedy, a 2018 freshman, coming in on the wing that who knows? I mean, he's a freshman. He wasn't necessarily highly rated. So he's a complete unknown as well. So, yeah, I think getting Kyle Castlin at least makes you feel like you have a safety net there if those other two guys aren't ready to contribute at all.
Let's just go back a couple weeks. When the news first comes out that Mac's going to be taking the Louisville job, there's always a chance that Mac would take a higher up job at some point. And when the Louisville job became open, it was very attractive for Mac, from his family and a lot of other areas. With that being said, do you think the Xavier Athletic Department always viewed Steele as the guy to take over once Mac officially decided to move on wherever he would wind up?
Well, I think it's clear by how they handled the hiring process that they thought very highly of him. Now, I don't think at all that they were like, he's definitely the guy. It's going to be a no-brainer, and the whole hiring process is a formality. I think they went in saying, let's see exactly who's interested in this job, who we think we can reel in, who we get to interview for it, and then we'll assess the candidates from there. And I think they went in thinking highly of Travis Steele. They started interviewing candidates, and they were blown away by what Steele had to say, and thought, "Yep, this is clearly the guy. It's no doubt. He's as good as any candidate, or better than any candidate that we're interviewing. So let's go ahead and get this thing done as quick as possible."
Do you think that Steele not having any head coaching experience, if he had head coaching experience prior to this whole interview process, do you think it would have been that no-brainer that you talked about?
Well, it would depend on what what his head coaching experience, what that history looked like in terms of his record, right? I mean, head coaching experience, everyone talks about wanting that when they make a hire, but what if the head coaching experience isn't all that successful? What if what if you're just kind of an average head coach at that point? Then I'm not really impressed by your prior history. So I'm never a big you need to have head coaching experience guy. I'm always on the side of let's hire the young up and coming assistant who's hungry, looks really talented, and everyone thinks highly of. To me, that's always your best bet. And look, if there's a young guy at a a young up and comer at a school that's like a low major that you think would be really good, for instance, Nate Oates at Buffalo, I thought would have been an excellent candidate for this job as well. So if you would have decided that's the guy, and you like that he has a little bit experience running his own program already, then sure, I'd understand that. But for the most part, it wouldn't really be much of a factor for me when making a hiring decision.
So let's get into some recruiting tidbits now. Steele hired Jonas Hayes, who Brian Snow said on your guys' podcast is one of the best recruiters in the state of Georgia and will really put an emphasis on getting guys from the Peach State. They offered Brandon Tucker, 6'3" guard who plays on the Adidas circuit with the Atlanta Celtics and seems to have a good and Xavier also seems to have a good shot landing Elias King, who's a 2019 kid who used to be committed to Georgia. I talked to a couple of AAU coaches from Georgia the other day, and what I got from my conversations with them was he's going to get the state of Georgia. With the addition of Hayes, what do you think are some other states you see Hayes trying to dabble in and get other than Georgia?
Well, I think you'd have to look at Michigan first and foremost, just because he's already had some big success in Michigan. He's gone head to head with the big boys, Michigan and Michigan State, and beat them. So, got bringing kids to Georgia. So you got to bring them to Xavier. Maybe doesn't have quite the same national brand as Georgia, but from a basketball perspective, they certainly have been more successful, and it's closer to Michigan. So I would think he'd be able to have success in the state of Michigan. And then also I think you'll see him work in the Carolinas and maybe even up into Virginia some. He's got some contacts in other places as well.
Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, or as we mentioned earlier, Steele did a heck of a job recruiting the Midwest, especially the Indy area, as he got guys like Trayvon Blewett and Paul Scruggs, who are some targets in the 2019 class that the coaching staff are focusing in on and would be huge for Steele's first recruiting class as a head coach.
Well, it's still really in flux because you're getting your two new assistant coaches into the mix, and Jonas Hayes and Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, a guy who's going to recruit like the Minnesota area, Wisconsin, some maybe Milwaukee, some places like that. He also has some ties back in the closer in the Midwest, around the Xavier area, like Indiana and stuff like that. So he's a guy who's recruiting Armand Franklin out of Indiana, and Travis Steele has a really good relationship with Armand Franklin. So I think he'd be one of the top guys to keep an eye on. Also, a guy that's been talked about a lot in Xavier recruiting now, since midway through the high school season or even before that, Luke Anderson, a sharpshooter out of the state of Florida, a face-up forward type of player, 6'7", 6'8", somewhere around there. Can really shoot the basketball, one of the better shooters in the country in this 2019 class. I'd keep an eye on him, as I think he's one of their top targets as well. There will be a lot of targets that continue to emerge, and I mean, you guys know how it is when you get into this April period. Teams' hot boards are changing on a day-to-day basis. New guys are popping up constantly. They're losing faith in certain guys and really getting hot on other prospects. So that'll continue to change. We'll have all of that on the musketeerreport.com message boards as we continue to progress through the evaluation period in April and then get into the summer recruiting months.
All right, so I wanted to end on this question, another recruiting thing, but UCLA parted ways with assistant David Grace yesterday, who's considered to be one of the best recruiters in the country, and got guys like Lonzo Ball, TJ Leaf, Kayvon Looney, Sharif O'Neal, Chris Wilkes, the list goes on. But I'm not saying Xavier will get him, but do you expect Travis Steele to talk with Grace and try and get him on his staff?
I'll be honest with you. I really don't know. I don't know if they have any type of previous relationship that might make it an obvious connection. And I haven't heard anything about Grace being a potential candidate to fill the third assistant spot at Xavier. The one thing I do know is that, you know, Travis Steele certainly has an open spot. He'd certainly listen to any good candidate. So if Grace is interested in the job, I'm sure Steele would definitely talk to him. But they're also not necessarily a hurry to hire that third candidate spot. They have a guy in Jeremy Groh who's been very loyal to Xavier, very loyal to Steele and Chris Mack, and has been working as the director of ops for the last several years under Mack. He's a guy that could be in position to fill that third role. So I think they're very comfortable going through the evaluation period with Jeremy Groh as their third traveling assistant and giving him a taste and kind of making the hire and the decision from there. So I don't think that'll necessarily be a quick process in terms of making that third hire. Although if the right candidate becomes available and Steele feels like they've got to get it done, then you never know. So always a fluid situation when you're talking about assistant coaching hires.
Yeah, I mean, David Grace and Travis Steele do follow each other on Twitter, though, so maybe.
Well, there you go, confirmed.
Yeah, confirmed right there. So
you heard it here first.
Thanks for coming on, Rick. We really appreciate it. Where can our listeners find you?
At Twitter is probably the best place. At Rick Broering, that's Broering. And if you want to catch the Xavier coverage, it's all at musketeerreport.com, part of the 27 Sports Network.
Awesome, Rick. Once again, thank you for coming on, and hope to talk soon.
Thanks, Rick.
All right, thanks, guys.